When working on the problems, we can oftentimes use the chapter demonstration problems as a good starting point for doing the problems or doing the homework in the end of chapter questions. Let's take the problem problem number 2 on page 40 for an example. Notice here that we have some information for the Chevron Corporation, of which is very similar to the information we analyzed for the Microsoft Corporation in the chapter demonstration. We have the years 2010 through 2006. Well, for Microsoft, we had 2010 through 2005. So in this case, we're going to be able to quite easily simply just click on column G, right-click, and click Delete. And now we have 2010 through 2006. Okay, in addition to that, quite simply, this is no longer Microsoft that we're going to analyze. We have the Chevron Corporation. So let's change the Microsoft to Chevron. Okay, and we're still dealing with millions of dollars. Let's go ahead and change the 2005 to 2010 to 2006. And hit return. Now, when we eliminated column G, some of our formulas that we had entered into our demonstration problem are no longer valid because we got rid of column G. When we get to that point, we're certainly going to have to fix those up. But at least here we have an excellent starting point. Probably the next thing that we would want to do is notice that we have sales, which is pretty much the same thing as total revenue. So we can leave sales, and net income, we can leave that in there. And of course our formulas for the net profit margin, or otherwise known as a profit margin, are still valid. So we can leave that as well. So now the next logical step is to rework or re-enter the sales and the net income over the top of what we had for Microsoft. Go ahead and do that. Once again, one of the things that I encourage you to work on as you're entering these numbers is to work on your 10 key skills. So rather than pecking away with your 2 index fingers on the top row, go ahead and put your first 3 fingers, your index, your middle finger, and your ring finger of your right hand onto numbers 4, 5, and 6 of the 10 key pad and practice on your 10 key skills. Okay, so once we have these numbers in, now we're back in business. Now, if you remember that when we did our homework problem, we had actually entered in the formula for the compounded sales growth. Nowhere in our problem does our problem number 2 ask us to do that. So in this case, we can simply delete those 2 rows of information. Okay? Now, when looking at the sales growth, this here relates to item B. Well, first off, item A says to calculate the net profit margin. Well, we've already done that here. Okay? When calculating the percentage changes in sales for our helper row, we no longer need the information for 2006, so we can delete that. Okay? And now then, when looking at the geomean function, notice here that it's still trying to calculate the average to include through column F. We really want to only include through column E. So let's go in and change the F to an E and hit enter. Okay? Now then, in part B of our problem, it's asking us to use the geomean to calculate the average annual growth rate for revenue and for net income. So we need to do the same thing for net income as we just did for sales. So let's go ahead and add our helper column, percentage change in net, and let's just say net income. Okay, we need to do the same calculation we did here for the change in sales, which was B5 divided by C5 for net income. For sales, if we take B5 divided by C5, okay, let's do the same thing for net income. Let's say is equal to 2010 net income divided by 2009 net income. And once we have that, let's go ahead and use the same formatting. So grab go up to percentage change in sales. The percentage would work, but let's just try to keep it consistent. Use the format painter and copy that down to percentage change in net income. Now that we have that done, let's go ahead and copy that across the 4 years that we're analyzing. Now here we had percentage change in sales, percentage change in net income. Sales growth, let's say net income. Here we use the GO mean. Here, once again, use the GO mean. Okay? And I think as far as using the GO mean function, we learned how to do that. I want to leave a little bit of this for you to do on your own, so I'll let you do that one on your own. Now, once you've calculated the compounded growth rate for your net income, let's go ahead and tackle Part C of our problem. Part C of our problem says to calculate the average annual growth rate of total revenue using the average function. Now, this, of course, is going to result in a different answer than Part B of our problem. In addition to that, in our chapter demonstration problem, we didn't really work with the average function, so I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of insight on using the average function. So let's go ahead and click in A12, and let's go ahead and type in annual growth rate. Okay, and the annual growth rate for looks like revenue. And I'm just going to abbreviate rev. Okay? The growth rate in revenue, otherwise known as sales, is simply going to be equal to the 2010 divided by the 2009 minus 1. Change that to a percentage and put a decimal point or two in there if you like. So our annual growth rate, and then use the autofill handle and copy that across. Here we can see the growth rate for each year. Now let's calculate the average growth rate in revenue. So this is where, once again, I think I'll let you explore this one on your own. Simply use the average function. If you go up here in the FX, type in average, hit return 2 times, and it pops up average, and fill it in as appropriate. And so here we've created the helper row that helps us to calculate the average growth rate rather than just the annual growth rate over the 4 years that we're working with. Finally, it's not to say that we couldn't calculate or use the average function and calculate the average growth rate without using the helper column, the helper row here. However, I sometimes like using the helper row simply because it does exactly that. It helps me to visualize the mathematical operation that's taking place. In this case, if you don't want to use a helper row and just crunch the number with the average function without that row, that's fine as well. Finally, the last part of problem number 2 is asks us to create the column chart. Of course, you need to fix up your chart here too. This is no longer Microsoft. It happens to be the Chevron Corporation. In addition to that, I believe back in the chapter demonstration, it showed us how to change from one chart type to another. Initially, we had used the column chart and changed it to a line chart in the demonstration. Now, simply undo the changes that you made when following along with the chapter demonstration. I hope this demonstration of using the demonstration problems as a template for the homework problems is beneficial. Generally speaking, they do present a very good starting point for our chapter homework. That's it for this recording. I will see you again in chapter number 2.